Andy, hi.
Hi, Rick.
Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak, and it's even more pleasure when it's with us. So thanks for helping out today.
Good to be here.
Andy, a couple things. You know, you've been in this game for a long time. You're a general counsel. You're the chief privacy officer. In some cases, those are separate functions at companies. In some cases, those are the same person at companies. We have now two state privacy laws that are on the books. We have, God knows how many are actually going to see the light of day. As a CPO, how are you thinking about, other than with great anxiety, how are you thinking about approaching this? What's going through your mind these days on having to comply with multiple state laws?
I mean, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, Rick, I right now and in the recent past, I've worked in small to medium-sized companies. So that means that I need help, and I can't do that alone. So I need privacy champions inside the business. That's typically product team, engineering, all the way up through leadership. Part of privacy, and these privacy laws touch every part of the organization. So privacy is a truly cross-functional operation. And so first thing that comes to mind is I've got to keep rounding up privacy champions inside the business, outside of legal, outside of privacy. The next thing I think that comes to mind is my network and my group of GCs and CPOs and privacy managers and lawyers that work on these things for companies of varying size and scope. I think it's critical to have people that you're pressure testing your ideas with, even WireWheel, if you use a platform like that, like WireWheel, to be able to bat those ideas around with the people that are creating that software and creating the compliance mechanisms that you might be using. And then the third thing is outside counsel. Picking the right spots and the right moments to have outside counsel weigh in, making sure that, I know it sounds silly, but making sure that the outside counsel you choose actually reads the law and doesn't rely on client, reading an article here and there and saying what the law, they think the law says. So picking and choosing your tools for the job that you're doing, and relationships where you can get, tricky questions answered, because that's where the rubber meets the road often.
Yeah, those are three great points. I want to drill down on those just a little bit. The outside counsel thing, right? So I don't know how many people are listening today that are attorneys or work with their in-house attorneys, but you're a small to mid-sized company. You're an attorney. You're the general counsel. So why would you need to go to outside counsel? And I think that's a thing that companies wrestle with, right? Oh, we've got an attorney in-house. He or she knows what they're doing. We don't need to pay for outside counsel.
It reminds me of when people, internally pitch the idea of hiring an internal lawyer, and they say, all our cost will go away. All our outside counsel costs will go away because we've brought that lawyer inside. And what ends up happening is the lawyer comes in, they do defray some of the cost, but then they start like lifting up rocks and asking questions about things. And then the company scales and the company wants to do really interesting, challenging things. And the GC CPO cannot do it all, especially when you start wading into different countries. We're talking about the GDPR, we're talking about Latin America, Asia, especially as you go outside of Europe. As you know, Rick, basically every country has its own data protection regime. So how am I going to marry that up against, say, the GDPR, if that sits as the floor in your mind? What do I need to comply with? Having had to do this in past companies, you have to have outside counsel. You can't possibly know everything in the world. When you, as a young lawyer, like in my first law firm gig, I guess I thought I had to know everything. And I thought the expectation was, the answer to everything. And I think there's a temptation to feel that same way when you go in-house too, and you're the only lawyer, you're one of a few lawyers, to think, well, the business expects me to know the answers. And that's probably your experience too, as a CPO. Like, they expect me to always have the answer, but number one, they don't. And number two, what they do expect is for you to give them the frame within which to think about things, and how to go forward, and how to actually solve practical problems. So you got to get an outside counsel view on certain things, and their breadth across multiple clients, across sizes and different industries, is what you need. And you often need the narrow question answered. You and I can give an overview on the GDPR or the CCPA to somebody inside the business, but that's not particularly helpful. I mean, it can be for a training or awareness, but it's not particularly helpful when you are sitting with a PM and an engineer, and they're asking you for ones and zeros and requirements about building privacy technology. And the answer inevitably is, it depends, or I don't know the answer to that. There's no enforcement history on this law, so I don't know the answer. So we must build product the best possible way we know how, within the framework of what we know about the law. So, it's as you noted, like, it's myopic, I think, to suggest you wouldn't ever have outside counsel, but the question really should be about, tactically, how are you using them, and what are you using them for, and who are you using? Have you established trust with those people? Do they take the time to dig in and really understand, what is my client trying to do? What do they do as a business? What are their business needs? That's where outside counsel is really valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andy. And I can tell you, at the other end of the scale, in a previous life, I worked for an enormous size company, and we had 400 plus attorneys under our employ, and our OC budget, particularly for privacy alone, was bigger than probably some of what the top line revenue is for some small companies, right? It was really important to the business that we get expert advice on how to proceed with very important privacy questions.
Sometimes it's optical, Rick. Also, when you're a company that processes, large scale, has scale, and processes a large amount of data, or has sensitive data, or has something like that, your board and your investors need to see that you're taking it seriously, and you've got consultative relationships with your peers, and also kind of some of the best outside counsel, so that you really know.
Yeah.
You're getting multiple opinions, and you have to make the call at the end of the day, though.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit. So we're knocking on the door of May, and we're knocking on the door of, I think it's, the third anniversary of GDPR. And remember all of the hoopla in the sort of 2-year window we had to prepare for GDPR. And much like the, Y2K, when we thought the world was going to end, on New Year's Eve 2000, we survived GDPR, and we survived the transition to GDPR. But we all did a lot of work in preparation for GDPR. The new state laws that are emerging here in the United States are GDPR-esque. How were you thinking about what you've done to be compliant with GDPR, how that relates to the state laws, and how your approach? What have you learned from the GDPR prep that you're applying to the state prep?
I always think, Rick, of that the Nike ad that came out around Y2K, when it showed like the clock turning and the world was exploding, and a guy was just running, casually running, like jogging through.
Yeah.
And it sort of felt like that. We thought that was what was going to happen, and I think we all knew that it would just be another day, but that something wouldn't happen quickly. But you're right; it had a feel to it, like, because it was transformative in a lot of ways. And the GDPR picked up smaller companies. You didn't have to be a huge company. It's not sort of like, going public and then having additional requirements because you're a public company. It applied to all of us who really were touching EU data. So that meant a lot of companies of varying size. I learned a lot. I learned really to rely on my friends and network a lot, and to realize that having a take and having an approach on something was the most important thing. Thinking an issue through, kind of documenting what your thoughts are, and coming with a position. And that played itself out as correct over time. And I didn't know if that would be the right take in the beginning, because you and I have an ad tech background, and when the GDPR was coming online, lots of lack of clarity about cookies and consent, and we just needed time to see how that would play out. We still don't really have great data on that, but we have evidence of action, what companies have done or not done. So we learned a lot from that, and I think taking that forward, I take those positions forward. I think we've got some time to prepare for CPRA and for the Virginia law as well. And I just know there's going to be changes, things that are going to be perceived or looked at differently. And so I take the same mindset in, which is let me be thoughtful about these issues, approach them carefully, thoughtfully, with privacy by design in mind, and have a take. And as long as that, bounce that take off of other people, friends, counsel, people inside our business, privacy champions, and then, get to a place of comfort and just go. And I think you're often going to be served by that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. You've talked about networking with people in the field. That's really some of the most critical advice and most important advice you can get. Throughout my career, I've been very fortunate that I'm involved a lot of the industry associations, a lot of people that I have known a long time. We all sit in the same kinds of chairs, some at competitive companies, some at accretive companies. And at the same time, regardless of whether we're competitors or whether we're partners, nobody ever hesitates to pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you handling X? How are you thinking about this? We want to make, forget about that we compete with each other. How do we make the platform better? How are we all, can we influence the way a law is being interpreted or written? Can we influence the industry to come up with best practices? Can we protect ourselves? Having that network is really a helpful thing, and clearly it's done well for you.
In 2017, a couple of us in the ad tech ecosystem gathered to start discussing the GDPR from a non-competitive angle. More of us started gathering and talking, and it was all people were competitive companies in the room, and it became clear that we had so many things that we needed to discuss and talk through and compare notes on. And eventually, out of that group, the chief privacy officer of Quantcast, she pushed her team to develop what then became the transparency and consent framework that was passed on to the IAB, which is now utilized. So
Yep.
of that group of ragtag people networking, but for that, we wouldn't have the beginning of what became actually something that helped the industry comply.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good transition to my next company. So in the past, last question, my last company, in the past few years, there's been a tremendous increase in technology in the way we collect data, technology in the way we use data, technology in the way that we get permission, technology from companies like WireWheel who offer a platform to manage all that. How are you using technology, and how are you feeling about being an early adopter, being a laggard, the wait and see approach? How do you think about those things?
I got a friend, Danielle Shear, who says it well. She's the general counsel of Bottom Line Technologies, and prior to that, Carbonite. She says you have to build machines that'll outlast you at a company. And she takes a very tech forward approach. And I've tried to follow her lead on that. She does it better than I do, but she builds machines and she builds things into place in order to make sure that things move and are documented in ways that outlast anybody in the business. And having come off an exit at my last company, I saw that play out. was able to hand over records of processing activity, just hand them over, and it's a very different conversation than, than a diligence sheet when you're looking at trying to sell your company. And the question comes about what you're doing to comply and how you show what you're doing to comply. It's a very different situation when your answer is, here's this, kind of spreadsheet I started 3 weeks ago. Or here's nothing. I haven't thought about this. So it's a very different approach. You do have to build machines, and they don't have to be perfect, and they can iterate, and you can evolve. And we're not shy about asking questions to WireWheel or other technology providers that we use. Help us figure out the right way to build the machine, because the machine will never be perfect either.
Yeah, it's true. It's an ongoing process. I've been in the data business most of my career on the privacy side. But if we think about the amount of data that we're able to collect, the speed at which we're able to process that, the way in which that data is being used, technology now like artificial intelligence and machine learning, how is the technology and industry best practices and legislation keeping up with that in a way that we can run a business cost effectively and at the same time protect our civil liberties or protect our consumers or protect our, whatever the bottom line is.
Huge points. I say this like ad nauseum to the folks at Alyce. Compliance is a flowing river. It's always flowing, always changing. There's never going to be a point in time when you get it all right.
Exactly.
So we have to act that way. We have to keep going.
Yeah. Andy, for those that know Andy's prolific and is often making Andyisms on Andyisms. I think I just coined that on LinkedIn. I saw you I think it was yesterday, comment about a federal privacy law. Thoughts about that? Are we going to see one ever? Is it going to be in 21? Are we going to make the Europeans happy with this? Are we going to make ourselves happy with this?
Andyisms, I like it. Well, so we've been doing a podcast and a Zoom show, which is really fun, with Pedro Pavone from Facebook and myself, and it's been super fun. And we've discussed this topic a lot, as you can imagine. And Justin, your CEO, is going to be his episode is coming out in May. And we talked about it too. We touched on it as well. I made a not so hot take that I don't think we're going to get one. Yeah. And I hope that I'm wrong, because I think we need one.
What do you think the blockers are? There's just too much to do on Pennsylvania Avenue right now, or privacy itself is too complicated, or some other reason?
Several years ago, Rick, I was at the Network Advertising Initiative Summit, and they had a panel. This was now 7 or 8 years ago, a panel of congressional staffers, and they asked them the same question back then, 7 or 8 years ago. And they said, it's not going to happen. There's no appetite for it. Our constituents don't ask for it. And so I think there's a tension or a difference between what regulators and regulators maybe and Congress thinks that we need versus what the people think we need or want. And I'm not 100% sure, number one, that the appetite is there. I know people talk about privacy, but utilization of GDPR rights or privacy tools or CCPA rights is very low. And we could discuss whether, what the barrier is there or what that's about or why. I don't think adoption is massive around these things. I think there's awareness, and people are pleased that more things are happening and more rights are flowing to people. But how difficult is it to execute those rights? It's pretty difficult for someone if they wanted to really cleanse their data. It's nearly impossible. So I think, number one, I don't think there's necessarily like personal appetite for it around the world. And then yeah, like your point, we obviously have a government that's very stagnant on so many different things. And in order to get a federal privacy law approved, there has to be oversight and enforcement of that law. It's inevitably going fall to the Federal Trade Commission, who will need more money and will need to grow, and that's antithetical to Republican values. So like I just think there's just going to be this consistent tension. And then I think you just add the we're in a global pandemic. There's racism and things that are happening that just far exceed the needs at the moment. It's sort of similar to why we don't invest in the space program so much anymore. Like, people aren't seeing it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of that. But so if we roll the clock back to 2000, when I think, if I remember correctly, and I apologize if I have the wrong number, but was it 27? We had 27 or 37 different state spam laws, California being the last of them. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And the next thing you know, we had a very rapid discussion about canned spam, and we passed a preemptive spam law. I see parallels today with our privacy laws. Do you think there's enough pressure that's going to be exerted if, for example, California, Florida, Texas all pass, slightly conflicting privacy laws? Texas may not be the best example. I'm picking them because they're a large state, but
maybe, Rick, but we also have so many breach laws right now. So we've managed that, and I don't know that it's going to make the difference anymore. Yeah. I just think, it's the cynical side of me just says just more job security for outside counsel that handles this work, right? And actually that is an area where they can provide a lot of value if they're on top of all of it. And they're like, when you have a breach, if you've been through that, it's unsettling in so many different ways.
That's a polite word.
Having an outside counsel that picks you up and says, all right, like, we're going to get through it, and we're going to help you get through it. We got you. We're going to run a project. Like, that's helpful. Whether it plays out that way, I don't know, but having that is helpful.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to roll back to something we were talking about just a little bit earlier, and it came, I'm prompted to roll back to it by a question that came up, which you had mentioned about talking about your internal privacy champions, your L1s, as some people would call them. How are you going about identifying people and training those people? And do you have the concept of a privacy council in-house, and do you get buy-in from the corner office, and do people meet regularly, or is it informal, or how are you running that kind of a program where you are now, or how have you done it in the past?
Probably a lot like you, Rick. When I took the job at Alyce, it like making sure that the CEO, I didn't take the job without talking with him about this, ahead. He leaned in on these issues, not me. So, he said, we need this. We need somebody like you that can do both of those things for us. And so it's self-selecting in some sense. And then you get into the business. It's really easy, I think, it's particularly in companies of our size, it's really easy to identify who your champions are going to be. Yeah. It's often the product folks that take an interest in it because they know it's really important. It has a future. It helps scale the business. Or if you have an AI data science team, they're going to be very interested in doing it. And then I think it's just a matter of, I like to tell engineers when I talk to the engineering team at large, the more you know about this, the better it is for the company, but also the better it is for you, for your career. Like, no, this stuff is not just not going away. It's getting more and more prevalent and intense. And the more you know about these things, just the more marketable you are as an engineer. And then it's just sort of noticing and identifying, which things within that particular person's sphere are important. Your marketing team is no different. Talking to them, they know this is an issue you need to be out in front on. You need to be talking about it, and they need to know that they've got someone that can backstop them on that. So you establish those relationships the best you can.
Yeah. Earlier in the week, or was it last week already? Time flies. We had our client-specific spokes conference, and we had representation from a couple different of the recruiting people, and this subject came up. Privacy people are being embedded in not just as champions, but actually embedding privacy people into the engineering team, embedding privacy people into the marketing team, embedding privacy people into the data science team, right? It's on one hand, I see privacy having an explosion of attorneys. And then on the other hand, I see the privacy world having an explosion of practitioners who are either supporting the attorneys or supporting the particular lines of business within the organization. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
it's cross-functional for
Yeah.
sure.
It's not quite a legislative question, but we are very happily coming, we hope, to the end of this crazy COVID year that we've gone through. And companies are starting to think about opening their doors again. Restrictions are being lifted here in Massachusetts, where you and I both are, about how many people can be around each other and masks. And here in Massachusetts, we happen to have one of the higher adoption rates for vaccines. How are you as the GC and how is your company thinking about bringing people back to the office? You know, there was a time pre-COVID where companies would have said, never, ever, never, ever will I let people work from home. And then it was forced upon them. And then they went, oh, wait a minute, maybe this isn't as bad as we thought. Maybe there's some hybrid model here. How are you guys thinking about that?
I think we're starting by listening to our people, talking to them, getting their feelings, seeing what people need. We're already pretty distributed. We have an engineering team in another country, so we with a time zone challenge. So we've already been sort of working remotely in a lot of ways, and so I think for us it's going to be a combination of what do the people want to do, how do they want to operate in the future, and I think probably more than likely we'll opt towards kind of having the office be a little bit more of a shared space where people will come and collaborate. And I still think there are people that are going to want to be there pretty frequently, some more or less than others, but I think it's going to be more like show up, don't show up, you're available for a meeting.
Yep.
Like a lot of people will probably upgrade our conferencing capabilities to make sure that everybody can comfortably conference, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote. And I really think that's the future. We would like to hire anywhere. You know, I put a role out on our team, an ops role recently, and that role can be a lot of places. It does not have to be in Boston. So on the privacy side of things, I think the real tricky questions are, you know, can I require people to be vaccinated? Can I keep records of that? Should I keep records of that? And I think, I don't know exactly where we're going to land on that, but I don't think the people in our company are going to be comfortable going into an office, you know, being indoors without a mask unless they're sure that those people have been vaccinated. And like you said it well, Rick, like Massachusetts has a high adoption rate. So I'm less concerned that we're going to have large numbers of people unvaccinated that want to come into our office. But that's a reality for a lot of people in a lot of states and countries. And it's very challenging to figure out what you can require and what you can't. And there are going to be reasonable objections by people for health or religious reasons or things. And so it's sort of beating the same drum, but it's like one moment at a time, take a position, see how it goes. Don't be too stuck on one position.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, I will say if there has been any benefit to COVID, it's been the proliferation of webinars. These have all been really informative. The amount of traffic that we've been attracting on our WireWheel webinars as our colleagues in an assortment of industries has been tremendous. Being able to share that time with people like you and for you to share your time with us is just wonderful.